Okay, anyway, I'm sorry for the confusion, and if anybody's listening to this on the archives, I apologize. There must have been something wrong with the system. We will hunt down the guilty party and punish them appropriately. Although I fear that I might be the guilty party. It may have been something in how I set up the material on the class. But anyway, since it's Yom Yerushalayim, at least it is here now in Israel, and it will be for you later this evening in Chicago, and Barbara, for you it's already here. I just thought to say a little something about Yom Yerushalayim, and this is something that I said a few weeks ago in the context of Yom Ha'atzmaut. There's this well-known piece from Rav Kook. During World War I, Rav Kook was, he had left Israel, and he had gone, to do the business of the Jewish people in Europe, and he got stuck in London during World War I, and he was unable to come back to Eretz Yisrael, and he spent the duration of the war in London and later in Switzerland, where he served as a rabbi. And while he was there, of course, he tried to promote the good causes of the Jewish people, particularly as it related to Zionism. He had this idea to launch a movement, not a political movement, but more of a social, cultural, activist movement under the name of Degel Yerushalayim, the flag of Jerusalem, which he tried to keep going. As a movement, it didn't really terribly succeed, but the ideas were still very powerful. I see that Tehillah Leah and Yair both logged on. I apologize for the confusion with the system tonight. I'm not sure what happened. I am, instead of going on to teach what it is that we were supposed to have studied tonight, I'm going to speak just a little bit about Yom Yerushalayim, but if you were on the shiur that I gave a couple of weeks ago for Yom Ha'atzmaut, it's going to touch mostly on the same material. I don't know if you were there or not, so it's up to you to decide, how you want to proceed. All right, I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry about that deal there. So in London, he writes this public, open call, an open letter this title, Degel Yerushalayim. It was probably, I think, originally written in Yiddish and then translated into Hebrew. This is from a volume called Ma'amarei Hariyah, collections of essays by Rav Kook. It's also available. Do I have it here in English? Ah, wonderful. I have it here in English as well. There's a volume called Rav A.Y. Kook Selected Letters, which is not only letters, but it's also essays and other things. It's a nice little volume in English. If you're a little bit unfamiliar with Rav Kook, it's a nice volume to have. I'm sure you can get it on Amazon. And it was a call to Orthodox Jews. Again, this is written in 1917 from London, and he's addressing himself to European Jewry. He says, we call you to the sacred task of building our Jewish nation in our holy land, in the land of Israel. Come to us, rally together under the banner of Yerushalayim, the Degel Yerushalayim, the flag of Jerusalem, which we now raise aloft before the whole Jewish religious public. We all know of the banner of Zion, the Degel Zion, which unites a certain portion of our brethren on the basis of our Jewish secular interests in the land of Israel. But there are many who have not joined the union of those who bear the banner of Zion, and a great many who feel it impossible to do so. We simply record the plain fact that this is so without questioning their veracity. So he says that there's an interesting thing. We know about Zion, we know about Zionism, and you look around and you see that there are a lot of Jews, particularly religious Jews, who have not rallied around that flag. And he says, I'm not questioning and I'm not judging, but it seems to definitely be the case that there are Jews in Europe religious Jews, pious Jews, the honored Jewish religious public, who haven't yet joined up with this Zionistic enterprise. Yet it cannot be that the largest, most natural and earnest portion of Jewry, meaning the religious population, the majority of the Jewish religious public should remain indifferent to the wonderful events of the present and not lend a hand in the holy task of building our nation on our sacred soil because of so-called objections. So he says, but it can't be. It's just puzzling. It's just disturbing. It's just not possible that this whole enterprise of the religious return, the Jewish return to Eretz Yisrael, that a large segment of the best population of the Jewish world is not going to be involved with that, that they're going to sit passively aside as the Jewish people become involved in this return to the Holy Land. So he comes up with this idea. Of the banner of Jerusalem. Now, Sion, the idea of Zion, in Tanakh, the word Sion is usually a synonym for either Jerusalem specifically or for Eretz Yisrael altogether. Sion from the same root as Mitsuyan, the distinct, the outstanding country or land or city. That's Zion. And Yerushalayim, of course, is Yerushalayim. And he says that we can have these two different banners, these two different digalim, these two different flags, one of Zion and one of Jerusalem. And the banner of Jerusalem can be an umbrella under which religious Jews may organize their ranks under its folds in order to carry out the work of construction in the land of Israel in accordance with our true Jewish religious spirit. Pride and courage shall we raise on high our religious banner, the banner of Yerushalayim. Barbara, you asked, did Rav Kook feel that this was the time for Kibbutz Galiot preceding Mashiach? Yes, probably he did, although that's not what he's talking about here. What he's talking about here is trying to create a mechanism by which the religious population who were either, at best non-Zionist, and perhaps even at worst anti-Zionist, a way that they could create space, a way in which we could create space to incorporate them. So he says that these two notions, these two kind of parallel tracks, Zion and Jerusalem, go hand in hand. From the early beginning of our history, the term Zion in Tanakh always expressed mamlachtiyut, our kingdom, our material power, which is certainly also holy in itself, and serves the realization of the holy spiritual aims of our nation, which was, is, and ever will be the kingdom of priests and a holy people of the world. In other words, he's creating this dichotomy that Zion is the kind of umbrella name for this world. We talk about Yerushalayim shel Mala and Yerushalayim shel Mata. That Jerusalem, this is one of the interesting things about Yerushalayim. In Tanakh, the word Yerushalayim doesn't actually appear in Chumash. Probably there's one place where Yerushalayim is referred to, although it's not referred to by that name. Does anybody know where that is? What's the one closest or most direct reference to Yerushalayim? Correct, Melchizedek with Avram Avinu. Melchizedek is known as what's Melchizedek the king of? Not Yerushalayim, but Ir Shalem. Ir Shalem. So the etymology of Yerushalayim Yeru is probably ear. Ear in Yeru means the city of Shalem. And in Navi and in Nach, when Yerushalayim is referred to, it's usually referred to in the singular, right? Yerushalem, and it's a kri uchtiv. It's a kri uchtiv that even though it's written Yerushalem, it's always pronounced Yerushalayim with the extra yud, as if that extra yud is always in there. So this idea of Yerushalayim, like a plural Yerushalayim, that there are two Jerusalems. So the Midrash and Chazal have this notion of the Yerushalayim shel Mala and the Yerushalayim shel Mata, the Jerusalem above and the Jerusalem below. We live in the Jerusalem shel Mata. We live in the Yerushalayim down here on earth, which is a reflection of some kind of idealized Jerusalem, like the abstract notion of what Yerushalayim is or ought to be or could be or might be one day. And this idea of an ideal and a real, of a notion and the projection of the notion into reality it might be what's underpinning here. Tila, you ask about Yerushalayim coming from the Lashon of Yerusha. That might be some kind of drasha someplace, but that does not seem to be the etymology of the term. So this idea that Sion becomes the name for... No, Tila, I assume that is a drasha that you've heard. I assume that that's a drasha that people make and have used. The idea that the name Yerushalayim echoes this idea of Yerusha, of inheritance. I'm just saying that I don't think that's the actual etymology of the term, but that somebody may have used that in the context of a drasha, I don't doubt. So this idea that there's Sion, which deals with the day-to-day, with the material power, with Gashmiut, with all of the challenges of the Zionistic movement to create a society, to create a culture, to create ultimately a state. Those ideas were far off to Rav Kook. Of course, Rav Kook did not live to see that. Rav Kook died in 1935. But this idea of Sion, with which we are partners with all Jews, religious Jews, secular Jews, whomever, to build something together. But the term Jerusalem, he says, the term Jerusalem, however, expresses the goal of attaining holiness in itself as the highest idealistic tenet of our Jewish existence, both for us and for all humanity. The place of our holy temple, the future house of prayer for all peoples, the city where sat our great Sanhedrin, from whence all has gone forth and will go forth the law for all of Israel. This is what Yerushalayim signifies. The whole Jewish religious community has forever been deeply bound up with these sacred aims. It is godly in its thoughts, holy in its faith, in its deep longings, in its holy prayers. The soul of our nations has expressed the hope for the restoration of the Shekhinah, the divine presence, in Sion, specifically through the rebuilding of Yerushalayim, through the holiness of the temple and the elevation of the divine holiness within us and through us to the whole world. So he has this idea, again, he develops this dichotomy that there's Sion and there's Yerushalayim, and there's a degel for Sion and a degel for Yerushalayim, a banner, a rallying for each. And he turns to the religious population in Europe who have not yet found the ability to join the Zionistic enterprise. And he says, you know, I mean, these are my words, it's not Rav Kook's words, but I'm trying to capture what he's saying. He says, I just can't understand why anyone wouldn't want to be a part of this. So I understand that there might be some reticence. There might be some reticence to joining in some kind of secular endeavor, because this was something that seemed foreign to the religious population in Europe. The idea that the Jewish people would be involved in trying to build a Jewish society that was secular or had an overwhelmingly secular identity and component to it was unimaginable to many in Europe. But Rav Kook says, you don't have to only be on that playing field. There's another playing field. If you can't build Yerushalayim Shel Mata, you can be involved in building Yerushalayim Shel Ma'ala. Now again, Rav Kook doesn't use those terms here, but I'm trying to encapsulate, I'm trying to superimpose a different idea of Chazal here, but I think that it flows. And that idea is called the Degel Yerushalayim. The Degel Yerushalayim. So Yerushalayim, for Rav Kook, becomes a symbol for the spiritual enterprises of the Jewish people, for the attempt to create a not merely a religious society, meaning a society where people are religious and they can go to shul and they can have kosher food and et cetera, but a society which is imbued with the values of Judaism, of Torah, of holiness, of sanctity, of ruchnius, of spirituality. That's what Yerushalayim is about. That's the flag, the degel of Yerushalayim. That's the values that are placed under those. So it's not that these ideas are in competition, says Rav Kook. We have to build the Yerushalayim Shel Mata, but we also have to build the Yerushalayim Shel Ma'ala, the world in which we live now, the world that has to have, water that goes on when you turn on the tap and electricity to turn on the light, and streets that are paved and taxes that are collected, but also a Yerushalayim Shel Ma'ala. That when the Hebrew University was founded, the Hebrew University was founded before the founding of the state. Hold on 1 second. Trying to find what year. I don't remember exactly, but in the 1920s. Here, I'm putting up in the chat. In the chat is a link to an English translation of the talk that Rav Kook gave at the founding of the Hebrew University. And later Rav Kook, apparently said that he was a little bit tricked, because he lent his support to the founding of the university, and he 1925, April 1st, 1925, and he had some idea of what a Jewish university should be like, and he certainly thought that it should not teach biblical criticism, for example, but so he thought that it didn't necessarily come out exactly the way he imagined it, or the way that he had been led to believe that it would be. But that's not as important as the fact that he thought this would be a significant accomplishment of the Jewish people, that part of our return to Jewish control over our own affairs in our own in our own land would be that we would, we would have a university, and we would have an army, and we would have firemen, and we would have newspapers, and we would have, all of the kinds of normal things that people have when they are in control of their lives and they create a culture for themselves, but that we would also have Yerushalayim, but Yerushalayim shel Ma'ala, Yerushalayim of holiness and sanctity and ruchniut and spirituality and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he turns to the religious population and says, I understand that you're not interested in joining arms with our secular brothers, but why wouldn't you want to be involved in this great enterprise of bringing the Yerushalayim Shel Ma'ala down here to the earth, of creating a sacred, holy society, to creating room for what he saw, and here's the messianic component, the restoration of the Shekhinah down here on earth. So Yerushalayim, when we talk about Yom Yerushalayim, of course in 1948 in Tashach, when we succeeded in establishing the state, we did not merit to get Yerushalayim, at least the old city. The border ran down and cut us off. And it took 19 years until 1967. It took 19 years until 1967, until the Six-Day War, till we could recapture that. But not just to recapture, physically recapture, the walls and the stones and the alleyways and the Kotel and Harabayit, but to recapture the possibility that we could also wave the flag, the Degel Yerushalayim, and not just the Degel Zion. For the first 2 decades of the state, we had to be very occupied with firming up the Degel Zion and working to keep the state going and to get it up and running and to establish all of the kind of natural things that one needs. But after 1967 and the return to Yerushalayim, we were also able to now focus our attention, sometimes more, sometimes less, sometimes with more challenge, sometimes with less challenge, to try to figure out, okay, now that we have this wonderful vessel, a state, how do we fill it with the values of Yerushalayim? So on Yom Yerushalayim, we of course celebrate them and take note of the miracle of both obviously the victory, the physical victory, but also the potential to raise the banner of Yerushalayim, but the banner of Yerushalayim Shel Ma'ala, the banner of the Yerushalayim that represents the potential for the kind of society that we want to create. So those are just some thoughts about Yom Yerushalayim. Now, for those of us that are here in Yerushalayim or near Yerushalayim, it might be a little more immediate. But those of you that are not with us yet in and near Yerushalayim, this is the task of the Jewish people worldwide. Whether you're in Yerushalayim or in Chicago or in California or wherever, the task of the Jewish people is to create that bridge, to bring down the Yerushalayim Shel Ma'ala, or to bring at least the values and the aspirations of Yerushalayim Shel Ma'ala to this world, to create Yerushalayim, to wave the flag of Yerushalayim, the Degel Yerushalayim in this world for everyone to see and to rally around. I think that's maybe why he chose this metaphor of the Degel, of the flag, like in battle, as it were. The regiment raises the flag, and the soldiers rally around it, and it both It both gives them something to aim for, to be inspired by, like the Mishnah describes the notion of, in one context, Moshe's hands, in another context, the idea of the Nachash that was kind of like a flag up on a pole. The idea that it focuses people's attention. It's a kavanah generator, and it draws people's attention upwards. That's what a flag is. It's high on the pole, and it like tzitzit. The tzitzit, you look at the tzitzit, you see the blue. The blue reminds you, the tchelet reminds you of the sea reminds you of the sky reminds you of the kisei hakavod, reminds you of Hashem. It's a lens through which we can sharpen our kavanah, our intent, our focus, our concentration on the divine. So too the banner of Yerushalayim and the banner of Zion, which is not which is no small thing, and that is what Yerushalayim is about. So that's, I think, something to think about on Yerushalayim. Like Hanukkah. On Hanukkah we both mark and commemorate the physical miracle, the military miracle, the army miracle, but we also celebrate the spiritual. We also celebrate the potential of what it means to regain the Beit HaMikdash, to repurify that which has become Tameh. So too on Yom Yerushalayim, we celebrate. We all think about Moshe Dayan. We think about the idea Har Habayit Biyadenu, that we've won the war, we win the battle. But we also think about Rav Goren going in those such evocative pictures, of going into the Kotel, and that picture of the Chayal and blowing the shofar, and of going in and getting back to the Kotel. So most of us have only lived, in a time where, whether we were born before 67 or not, we've spent, our adulthoods since then. And, we should never forget. I mean, I think this all the time. I am always cognizant of this whenever I go into the old city. That I can get in my car right now. In 2 minutes, we're gonna log off now, and I can get in my car, and in 25 minutes, I can be at the Kotel. I can drive straight into the old city. Maybe not tonight. They close it off to traffic, but in principle, I can go. That's a remarkable thing. That for thousands of years, Jews all over the world prayed to be able to go back to Yerushalayim, and now we can drive right there. We could be there any second. So that has two components to it. It's both the zchut, the merit that we can, that we have access to this, something that we've become so accustomed to that we almost take it for granted. But also the challenge of what Yerushalayim represents. The challenge, as Rav Kook describes it, to create the Degel Yerushalayim, the values of Yerushalayim, and to give that teeth and make it have meaning in this world, in this society, in this state. And that's something that we all have to work at, regardless of what our current zip code or area code might be. So those are some thoughts for Yom Yerushalayim. I'm sorry that we had the technical difficulty, although I'm glad that we did this. We were supposed to study something today about the Congress of Vienna, and we'll do that next time. Although next week of course is Shavuos, and so we'll pick that up again in 2 weeks. But there was some homework. I asked you should look at the website. There was a website to visit that had a movie, an interactive. I don't know. They called it interactive. It wasn't really interactive, although was active. You didn't have to interact with it, but it was it's like a little film that shows how the map of Europe was redrawn after Napoleon's defeat, after 1815, at the Congress of Vienna, and then that's what apparently when you tried to log on, you got to that website. I'm not sure why that happens. And then to also at least just read the encyclopedia article, either the Wikipedia or something else on the Congress of Vienna.